You're listening to episode 53 of the Place We Find Ourselves podcast. I'm Adam Young, and today my friend Patria shares one of her stories from middle school. I haven't said this in a while, but just as a reminder, anytime you choose to share one of your stories publicly, you're taking a risk, a big risk. So as you listen to Patria's story, I'd ask you to consider, what does it mean to hold with honor the story of someone whom you likely do not know? And how can you receive Patria's story with a sense of sacredness, a sense of gratitude, knowing that it has cost her something to share this story publicly? Remember that if you want to listen to episodes as soon as they are released, you need to download the Place We Find Ourselves app. Episodes will be available for free 4 weeks after they are released to the app. So if you want to support the podcast for $2.99 a month and get immediate access, instructions are on my website. Thanks so much for listening. Here's my conversation with Patria. I have Patria with me. Patria, it's good to see you.
Thank you, Adam. It's good to see you too.
Thanks for coming on the podcast. Can you start by just saying a little bit about who you are, where you are, what you're up to?
Yeah, well, I first and foremost am a wife and a mom. My kids are grown. They're 20 and 22. And so they're both in college. Our world has changed pretty dramatically with those grown-up kids. I work full-time at my local church. I'm on staff there, and I just have the utter joy and honor of meeting one-on-one with women and doing story counseling and life coaching and prayer ministry. And I've been doing that for almost 2 years now. And then the other thing I would like to share is that I have a new website called The Broken and Beautiful. I've made myself available to a wider audience of people on purpose because we don't have anybody in Nebraska doing this work at this point.
So let's talk a little bit about your story and your kind of journey. When did you learn that you had one, and what prompted you to begin engaging your story?
So I learned that I had a story in 2007 or 2008. And it was a pretty dramatic, mystical experience, honestly, that I had. I was in the midst of a really big shifts in my world. So my husband and I had decided to leave a religious construction that we were generationally part of. And I was writing and teaching Bible studies for the first time. So I was really immersed in the Word. All of that, they were just big shifts in my world, in my existence. And I credit that for an opening, creating a space, almost a view into my background. I was actually one day praying over one of the things going on in my life. And I had this is where the mystical part comes in, a very, very strange and odd experience of a black spider crawling up and over my brain and landing in a memory in my view. And over the memory was a banner kind of thing that said sexual abuse. And it wasn't a new memory for me. I remembered the memory, but it was renamed by the Holy Spirit in that moment. And it was the first time I had considered the possibility of being sexually abused. It just was not on my radar in any shape or form. And so it was kind of like too weird not to follow up on, but also I think I had enough integrity to know that there was something I needed to follow up on in that. And so God had put some people in my life who helped me just sort of get regrounded a little bit and make a plan for how to start engaging that. And that was the beginning of it.
So 2007, 2008, you have this experience. It's an invitation into a deeper level of engagement with your story, and you respond to it. What's the journey look like as you begin? What are you afraid of? What obstacles get in the way? As you begin to engage your story, what did that look like for you?
Right at the outset, the fear was being wrong, wrongfully accusing another human being of harm. But mostly it was a fear of being labeled as needy and crazy. And I really had just been raised to believe that people who had these kinds of stories were crazy And so there was a lot of fear around that.
So say more about, as you begin to engage your story, needy, crazy, you start to feel, we could say, these accusations.
Absolutely. Just immediately. Yeah.
Say more. How did you navigate that?
I ended up getting to meet with a prayer minister, a prayer counselor woman who had led a well-known Bible study in her area for 26 years, was very grounded, very kind, very motherly to me. And she met with me for 3 years. The first year for 3 hours every week. She listened and helped me process and just helped me to sort of start experiencing good relationship. And, one day she said to me, Patria, I just want you to know that I'll be here for you. And it just changed my life. I think the Lord used her for a good relationship that was strong and solid.
Something about your relationship with this woman begins to dismantle needy and crazy. Yes?
For sure. Yeah.
How?
I think because she stayed solid as she heard my stories, there just wasn't anything too weird or strange for her to hold, to the degree that now I can tell you I had the spider crawling over my head. So for her to be able to hold all of these just really bizarre, what felt bizarre and strange and almost nearly untrue kind of things with courage and containment, a lot of attunement to me. And I never felt her leave my presence, when we were together. So just knowing that somebody in the world could hold that made me feel less crazy.
And so, the implication, of course, is that having a relationship with a woman who could hear what you were bringing was a new experience for you.
Yeah, for sure. To be able to bring something was a new experience for me. And then to have someone welcome that was new, for sure.
So you have generously agreed to read one of your stories that happened about when you were 11 or 12-year-old girl, middle school age girl, and is now an okay time.
Now is a good time. It was a Saturday afternoon after church. I don't remember how old I was, somewhere in middle school, probably around 11 or 12. We went to church on Saturdays and always had lunch with my aunt, uncle, and cousins afterward. Occasionally, depending on how tired my mom and aunt were from the week's activities and work, we would go out to eat instead of going home to fix a big meal that would require the chores of cooking and cleaning up after. It was a treat to go out to eat on Sabbath. This Sabbath, we went to a restaurant called the Copper Kettle. I clearly had lost the vote on where we would go because this was a restaurant I did not like. I didn't like it because I couldn't eat much on the menu there. Admittedly, the salad bar was kind of cool because they had a huge block of bright orange cheddar cheese and a cheese cutter so you could slice off as much cheese as you wanted and could make the slices really thin so they came off as curly cues. To my way of thinking, the cheese was the one saving grace of that restaurant. This Sabbath was like every other. All of us, minus my oldest brother who was already married and lived somewhere else, were sitting at the table, moms and dads, cousins, brothers and sisters, were chattering away about this or that. As a group, we were loud. We weren't short on conversation or laughter, lots of laughter, usually over the boys shooting spitwads at unsuspecting patrons sitting at nearby tables or engaging in some other naughty behavior while my parents would furrow their brows at the chaos. I was always a mixture of horrified and humored by the boys' restaurant truancy. This chaos went on. We were engaged pretty deeply in whatever conversation middle schoolers have at lunch after church. Always, always, the level of the noise around the table would steadily begin to rise. It started with a gentle hum that was soothing and joyful. Then the hum turned into a buzz with a more strident tone. Then the buzz turned into squawks and occasional screeches of laughter or annoyance. And it would escalate louder and louder from there. This was the pattern, always. This particular day, amid the noisy chaos, my brother wanted something from the salad bar and, as a child does, incessantly asked my dad to go with him. My dad wasn't paying attention. My brother became more demanding. Dad. I imagine he held his pointer finger out and jabbed it into my dad's arm over and over again. Dad! My dad didn't like a lot of chaos. This particular day at the restaurant, as the noise level rose, I remember becoming increasingly alarmed at the subtle hints that my dad was about to explode. I'm not sure I can even verbalize what those hints were, but I certainly knew them instinctually. A look, a movement of the arm, a type of sound in his voice, a look in his eye, and a set to his lips. As sure as the sun rises, he erupted. God damn it! Sudden silence. The entire restaurant, every person at every table and those milling around, went silent. The hum of conversation ceased. The clatter of silverware against plates went quiet. There was no noise. It was like in the movies after a bomb goes off and you can see what's around you, but you're confused and disoriented and can't hear anything. As in the movies, the sounds could again be heard slowly, bit by bit. It starts with ringing in your ears. Slowly, the level of noise began to rise in the restaurant, and as it did, so did the shame and tension around our table. I looked at my dad, feeling so badly for him, aware that he had just set this bomb off. I watched him as he tucked his head low and inward, leaned over my brother, pulled him out of his seat, and dragged him to the salad bar. Shame. There was such a mixture of emotions because I felt sorry for my brother who was being forced to now go get whatever it was that he had asked for, but who was suffering intensely from the outburst. I also felt powerless to help. My brother's head was also low. I think he was crying. I could sense that my dad needed to escape the tension and embarrassment. I could not. And I was a medic without supplies. Both my dad and brother had gaping wounds, and there was no first aid. I could not help him. I could only watch with the horror. Ashamed, afraid of my dad, afraid to speak, afraid of the faces and eyes I would have to eventually look up and into, powerless to leave or change anything. Then it was over, and we finished eating, climbed in the car, and drove home.
Thank you, Patria. So can we just go back and reflect on some of the parts of your story together?
Yes, sure.
It's clear from the story that this scene of noise and chaos gradually developing at a restaurant when you guys are out to lunch, this has happened before. I mean, you say always, the level of noise begins to rise. I mean, this has happened.
That's true.
And so, right away, we just have to acknowledge that this would not have surprised your father. The pattern of escalating noise and chaos, it would not have surprised him.
I mean, that's very true. It was for sure a pattern. And it's interesting because I always had the sense that it caught him by surprise because of the eruption. That's the way that I experienced that. But you're right, it couldn't have been a surprise.
What do you make of that?
It forces a view to change. It forces my view of my dad to change, from sort of a little boy who's just reacting to really some sense of almost planning, whether it's planning to not take care of these issues or just planning to be angry. I don't know which, but it changes that view for sure.
And so it's clear that your dad doesn't like chaos. We know this about your dad. You know this about your dad. And as the noise level is rising, your body starts to become aware and alarmed.
Very.
The way you put it in your story is, I remember becoming increasingly alarmed at the subtle hints that my dad was about to explode. So there's a reason that this 12-year-old girl knows the subtle hints that her father is about to explode. You have learned to read this man.
Yes.
You're hyper-vigilant about his emotional state.
Yeah, I was aware that danger could come. I was aware of danger coming. That's probably a better way to say that.
How is it that you became so attuned to the subtle hints that he's about to explode? Why? Any sense of why that girl is so aware of those subtle hints?
I mean, it's such a great question that feels a little bit challenging to answer. I don't know that I can answer it with a moment in time. I know there are a few experiences from really early on that either I've been told about or I remember, where I could please him. I could affect his moods. I could be his girl. I was very aware of that. I was aware that I had some sort of special power almost to please him, to bring him down from these places. I mean, to this day, that's true. You know, if I enter that place, and there's not much really that affects my core, the deep, deep insides, like seeing my dad laugh or smile, because I know I'm the one that can do that.
Yes. So let's talk a little bit more about the special power. Special power,
for sure.
That girl, you said, I think his little girl, mm-hmm. There is a specialness that she has come to know because she has, and these are my words, tell me if they fit. She has been trained to read his moods.
Yes, for sure. That's true. I mean, I remember would have been older, and even into adulthood, my mom would say, like, you go ask your dad because he'll always say yes to you. So it was very much a setup for me, training from both my parents, I would say.
And you, in your specialness, are sent by your mother to ask your father because he is more open to your requests than the other family members.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
So, I mean, this is a complicated question, but what's it like for a 12-year-old girl to have that much power?
Well, it's complicated. It's complex, right? There's, I think, shame with it, but not a lot, honestly, that I was aware of. It was mostly pride. It was mostly, hell yeah, I have this power, you know, and I can do something with it. And it just felt powerful. I mean, it was power that felt powerful, and power felt good to me.
And now, years and years, decades later, how have you come to understand the cost of that specialness or the cost of that power?
I would say that I'm still learning to understand it. I don't know that I have a lot of really, really well-honed words around it. But I would say that it's cost me relationships, for sure. It's cost good relationships with, not just with my own family and my brothers in particular, but with other people, because that powerful power is a center point of my being. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's how I bring myself into relationships, and really only becoming aware of that very recently.
Your brothers are set up by your father and your mother to envy the power of that girl, to envy you.
For sure.
And yet it seems that she wanted relationship with her brothers.
Desperately, actually. I would just follow them around. I mean, especially my oldest brother was 10 years older than the next sibling in line. And so the younger three of us, and I was in the middle of two boys. So I have three brothers. And particularly the next oldest one, I would follow around all the time. And then my little brother, I think I got close to him by just physically, like comfort. You know, I loved him as a little baby and then as he grew up.
And so just to put language around this, the nature of triangulation, and by triangulation right now, I simply mean that you were given a special spot of closeness to your father that your brothers were not and that his wife was not.
That's right.
And in that triangulation, you are set up to be envied, both by your mother and your brothers.
Yeah. I mean, yes. The cost in there is very high. You know, there's really not a type of abuse that's not in my story. And I believe it's a direct result of that envy.
There's a madness and a crazy, to go back to your word about crazy, like there's a craziness to simultaneously, as a 12-year-old girl, feeling this specialness and this power and this, frankly, this sweetness that you have with your father, and yet it being the source of envy, rivalry, at times enmity with your brothers and your mother.
I mean, completely. I mean, that's just so well said, Adam. That's the core war. I mean, it's the internal push, pull, what's real, what's not real, what's good, what's not good. I don't even know how to name what's good. But that's so normal. That core war is just so everyday. I didn't even realize it till I started writing my stories.
Of course. And so back to the story, what you write is that as an 11 or 12-year-old girl, you say a look, a movement of the arm. You're talking about your father, a type of sound in his voice, a look in his eye, and a set to his lips. You know these instinctually. You know, you are so attuned to this man. Mm-hmm. You're reading him, and you're reading him well. Any sense of how you got so skilled at reading your father's nonverbal communication? I mean, let's not forget, you're not a grown therapist. You're a 12-year-old girl.
That's right.
But you have the gifting and the skill set, if we could say it that way, even though it was so agonizing for you. You have the gifting of being able to read this man. And you were trained in that, and it cost you immensely. And I'm not saying it was good, and yet it's an ability. It's part of this specialness. I mean, how did you get so skilled at reading your father?
It started so early, Adam. I mean, the stories, there's a story that my mom just recently told me that I was not aware of, that by 2 years old, I was behaving in a way that my dad was more proud of than the rest of the family. So really, I believe there was something of this I was born with. Like I came with some sort of skill set. I think that was just really exploited, really used from a very early age.
Your father loved the presence of that 2-year-old.
Yes.
And again, this is the agony, is there's something, we could put it in this word, that was your glory. There was some way that you uniquely reflected the image of God, that even as a 2-year-old, the presence that you brought to the world, and yet you use a good word, that glory was exploited and consumed and used by your father.
Yes. And, just in the normal developmental patterns, I grew to notice him through that, that because that's who I was. So I was trained very early to just know. I just knew. I mean, that's what I would say is I just knew.
Right. And what 2-year-old or 4-year-old or 8-year-old is not going to just come alive on the inside when you see the look in his eye of delight?
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, it's still, I close my eyes because it still brings, it's that extremely complex joy, because with it comes the shame of it.
Say more about the shame.
It feels shameful to be that to my father.
And what do you mean by that? To be what?
So special, really, his surrogate. I mean, his spouse, the one that he came to for emotional care, for sure.
There's something about your beauty, your glory, your gifting that he turned to and delighted in more than his wife.
Hands down.
And so the word shame makes sense. And yet, just to underscore what you're saying, the complexity that little girl has to hold is she feels immense shame, and she feels immense goodness and sweetness and specialness. And that's the madness of triangulation. And there's no way, I mean, it's hard enough as an adult to make sense of that. There's no way a 10, 12, 14-year-old girl can understand the madness that she's living with, because it feels so good and it feels so bad.
Yes. In a phrase, it feels so good and it feels so bad and wrong. It feels so good and so wrong.
In the story, your father, as the noise crescendos, he erupts. and he swears, and he suddenly silences the restaurant with his immensity. So we can say this: your father's an immensely powerful man.
Yeah, I think that's true. As I was reading that thought, I was thinking about that thought, that he's an immensely powerful man. It just was so interesting because I see your point. I agree with you that he was an immensely powerful man. I did not think of him as powerful because I had more power than he did. I had the power to calm him.
And you were aware of his fragility.
Absolutely.
And so again, the madness of that girl, as she's looking at her father, who has just erupted with such authority that the restaurant goes silent. And it's not that you're not afraid, but you're not primarily afraid. You are primarily empathetic of his fragility and his shame in that moment. Yes?
Yes. Yes.
How can that be?
Well, it was my role. It was the thing I felt I was created for, I think, in that time. I wouldn't have had those words for that in the moment, but it was like, I'm up, batter up. You know, this is my thing to do. This is what I get to contribute to this chaos.
And what is required of you in that moment? What is this thing that you get to quote unquote, and I'm not saying it's not a contribution, but it has to be asterisk because it's a requirement of you. What's required of you in that moment?
To care for, to soothe, to bring peace.
We have to have some measure of awe at the restaurant, as I'm envisioning it, is filled with shame and people are looking away from this man.
Absolutely.
But not you.
No.
Your eyes go directly to your father. How have you come to understand that girl and her eyes looking toward him when everyone else is looking away?
Well, I mean, it's such a great point, Adam, because I can't see that necessarily without outside perspective, because it just was. It was just that I didn't look away. It wasn't that I couldn't. It was I didn't want to. I didn't want to look away. This was a special place for me to stay looking at Dad and to feel all of that comes, that power, that sense of prestige even comes to mind, the specialness of it.
And so part of, again, I don't know what other word to use than madness. Your father has silenced the restaurant, but the most powerful person in the restaurant is a 12-year-old girl who's looking directly at her father and is actually bringing some containment and some soothing.
Yes. In fact, my picture of myself in the restaurant in this scene is standing at the end of the table as an older person, much later, 15, 16. And it's like almost just a grounding rod. I see myself just stock still, looking on the scene and for sure observing. But for a long time, I thought I was outside of the scene, but I'm really not. I'm grounding the scene.
And you are doing what you have been trained to do, asked to do by both mother and father.
Yes.
You are containing and calming and soothing your father's immense shame.
Yes.
And you're the only one who can do it.
Yes.
And that gives you an immense sense of pride and specialness and frankly, an immense sense of agony and torture because you're not able to feel your feelings. You have to tend to this man.
Absolutely. Absolutely true. In fact, when I go through this story, and at some point, it would be good, I think, and helpful for me to go back and rewrite that when I can start feeling my feelings more in it. But it's just so clear that I'm writing almost as if I'm him. It's almost as if, or even my brother to some degree in that scene, I just don't even see myself as an 11 or 12-year-old girl in that memory.
And that's because you were asked to be not only an adult, but his spouse in the sense of bringing containment, connection, soothing, care, comfort. I mean, you are an adult as a 12-year-old girl.
Yeah. And the ironic, or again, maddening, I think, madness making thing about that is there's a table full of adults. I mean, there was four adults, 3 kids older than me. But I was that one that, that brought the grounding. And again, in the moment, it's the thing I could do. Like I wasn't sporty. I wasn't athletic, but this was the thing I could contribute, and I did it alarmingly well.
I know your mother was there, but I still have to ask the question, was your mother there?
My mother was there.
What do you imagine she was doing in the moment after your father's outburst?
Yeah, I only know she was there because she was there. I have no actual visualization of her in the memory. I don't know where she was at the table. Actually, I don't know where anyone was at the table but my dad and me. And my brother, obviously, who was sitting next to him. But if I imagine her face, there are 3 options. She was either slumping and averting her eyes, or it's possible she had some sense of disgust on her face. I know that look too. I think the thing that most readily comes to my mind, though, is that she probably had open arms to comfort my brother. That's the thing that, if I imagine, I think that that's what it would be, is to rescue him.
Right. And so again, oh God, I don't even know what word to use. Your mother is willing to mother your brother,
yes,
but she's asking you to be a spouse to your father, and she is in no way willing to mother you.
I would say that's true. That's a hard one to say, but I would say that that's true. Yeah. I'm sure that there were times that she held me and rocked me and those things. I don't have memory of them. I don't have any memory of that. And certainly not in that memory.
And in this story, in this moment, so much of the dynamics of your family are just freeze frame happening.
Yes.
Your mother is going to your brother, and you are going to your father.
Yes.
Your mother's eyes are looking to comfort your brother, and your eyes are directed at your father.
Yes. I mean, could you see a triangle more clearly with those freeze frames? Yeah.
So, Patria, any sense of what happened in your heart in the aftermath of this story? Or how do you think this story has shaped you? I mean, my sense is this story is more an encapsulation of what has already happened so abusively to you, rather than a story that significantly shifted something in your heart. It's more like it tells the truth about what has already happened in your heart. But any words you'd put to what did happen for you in the aftermath? How did this story shape you?
I think to a very large degree that's true, Adam, that this is it's a clearer memory that gives a better picture of the dynamics between the people and the players in my family. But also, as I reread the story this time, even I had not really noticed this before, but when I say I was a medic without supplies, it was really an indictment of myself, because I did have that power, but there was this level of shame that I could not attend to in this restaurant scene.
Here's what I'm hearing you say. You did not have a sufficient medical supplies to tend to your father's shame.
That's right.
And yet it was required of you.
And yet it was required. Right. And so the only option was to turn on myself. That would be the only option. I don't remember turning on myself, but I think as I continue to process this story, just putting myself in the memory as a 15, 16, 17-year-old girl versus an 11 or 12-year-old girl is an indictment. And it's a requirement of something that an 11 or 12-year-old girl is just not capable, is not supposed to be capable of doing. And so I think I didn't feel angry at my dad for that. I think it was just more the shame of not being able to accomplish what I was supposed to be accomplishing in that scene, in that restaurant that affected so many people, known and unknown.
How has your posture towards the 12-year-old girl in the story changed over the years?
I have a smile on my face because I really like her now. And I just started coming much closer to her. I've taken on the role of actually just in my mind entering the memory and getting close to her. And I can see her now as an 11 or 12-year-old girl. And I was awkward and soft and needy, as every 11 or 12-year-old girl is. And I really like her now.
Why?
Because, well, not only was she really gifted and smart, but like that's already been named, but I like her that she was awkward. I like her that she was a normal 11-year-old girl.
Yeah, I mean, it needs to be said carefully, but there's something absolutely restful about the fact that you did not have the medical supplies to tend to your father's shame in this particular story.
Yes.
Because part of your heartache is that you were actually able to come through for him so many times, but not in this story. It was too much for her.
That's right. It was too much. And so as I come near her, I tuck her under my arm and I look into her eyes and I see her big brown eyes looking up at me. And I can say, I see you. I see you. And you're not meant for this. You're not meant to be this to your dad. This has been a pivotal scene for me. I've been able to really come close to her. And even now, this maybe sounds a little bizarre, but if I'm going into hard situations now where I feel like this is going to be called on me to do with whatever that is, because this is a sort of, I don't know, superpower comes to my mind. It's the thing that I do easily and naturally. So that gets called on quite often. I have gotten to the point where I make sure that she's tucked under my arm, that I'm not leaving her behind in that, and that I'm not bringing more than is required of me.
And that's healing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's redemptive because you are aware that as a woman, you can be asked verbally, non-verbally, consciously, unconsciously, you can be asked in your relationships to tend to the shame of others.
Yes.
And you know how to do that naturally, instinctually, but it's not always kind to the other person or kind to you or appropriate. And what I'm hearing you say is you've learned how to navigate that better. Better.
I think there's more growth to happen, but I'm feeling the ability to notice when it's coming and to make different choices, or to even make a choice, even if I do the same thing, to let it be a choice rather than a reaction.
Yes. Which changes everything.
Changes everything about how I feel, or that sense of victimization or weirdness about the power. It changes all of that.
Patria, thank you for, this has been a lot very fast. Thank you for your vulnerability and your willingness to share this part of your life with the listeners. Thank you for your tenderness as you've talked about her.
Thank you, Adam, for having me and for the honor of telling my story.
If people want to connect with you, how can they do that?
I have a website called thebrokenandbeautiful.com, and you can message me through that. I would love to do that.
Thanks, everyone, for listening. Remember, if you want to get the next episode as soon as it is released, please download the Place We Find Ourselves app and support the podcast by paying $2.99 per month. Instructions are on the website. Have a good week.